All right, well, it's 3:30 on my watch, so I think it is go time. Pilar, if you're ready.
Absolutely, yes. And as people come in, they can just catch up with us.
Perfect. Let me adjust my screen here so I can actually see the slides. All right, lovely. All right, well, first we'll start with thank you very much to the NICE organization and the working group and committee that pulls together this conference. We're really grateful for the opportunity to share our perspectives on resilient leadership this afternoon. We promise to make it interactive to the extent that we can, and thank you all for joining and for joining this particular panel and listening in. We hope that you will have opportunities to participate, and so please expect for us to ask you questions, and we definitely would welcome any of your questions as we go through the presentation this afternoon. So by way of introduction, my name is Sarah Benczik. I'm joined by my colleague Pilar Jarrin. We both are leaders in our government and public sector practice at Deloitte, where we do human capital consulting, primarily for public sector clients. And what you will notice about us as we go through these slides, and maybe even by the topic of our presentation, is that we are not cybersecurity technologists, but what we have had is the opportunity to work side by side with cyber executives for more than 5 years at this point, to help them address workforce challenges and think about issues of leadership. And I think most pertinently, we have been serving a number of leaders over the last 8 months as they've tackled fundamental questions about leadership and resiliency during a time of pandemic. Things like, how do we manage leadership transitions? How do we reprioritize the kind of support that we're providing across the enterprise when we have to respond to a change in the way we all work in a new virtual first working environment in many cases. So we are very excited today to be offering all of you some of our observations from that experience, what we hope are some practical tips and actions that you can undertake, or that you can support your organizational leaders to undertake, or if you are an educator thinking about what it means to grow a cadre of resilient cybersecurity leaders, and then also to have some dialogue on this with everybody who's participating today, as we walk through all of these topics. So let's go to the next slide and really dive into what we mean by resiliency. What do we mean by somebody being a resilient leader? And in this context, even a resilient cyber leader. If you look up resiliency in the dictionary, you will read a definition that says something to the effect of able to withstand or recover quickly from a difficult condition. If you ask Brené Brown, who is a social scientist, she will tell you that a resilient leader is somebody who has a tolerance with discomfort and is an ability to navigate very difficult and uncomfortable situations from an emotional literacy standpoint, being able to understand what's going on, what am I feeling, and then how am I responding to what's going on in my environment. And then third, I think we could say, like, a lot of people operate when we think about leadership competencies and leadership development, well, I know resiliency when I see it. So for that, I'll offer up these 2 sticky note examples. One, are you the kind of resilient leader when stretched, where you're kind of a typical sticky note pad and you maybe, fall apart? Or are you prepared and knew in advance that you're probably going to be stretched as a cyber leader and you're the blue notepad, and when you're asked to stretch, you expand and can come back together? So I don't know, maybe it's a know it when you see it situation. I would like to think that there are some things that we can do to prepare the cyber workforce of the future to be resilient leaders and to think about our own competency in this area. And that's really what we're going to cover today. So if you go to the next slide, we will start our agenda by talking about what do we even mean by resilient leadership. Can you shift to the next slide, please? Thank you. We'll start with a discussion of what does it mean what does resilient leadership look like? What are some of the attributes and hallmark of resilient leaders? What do we mean by being resilient when it comes to the future of work and the cyber and managing and overseeing and developing a cyber workforce? We'll also then talk about some leadership in action, what it might look like as a resilient leader to break the status quo. And then finally, how does all of this tie back to the cybersecurity workforce framework and the future of work? And how can you bring all these ideas together to create a resilient cyber organization and workforce? Like I said, today will be full of observations, practical actions, and some of our perspectives. So let's go to the next slide, which sets up this first question of resilient leadership. And it looks like, yep, there we go. So what does the cyber workforce of the future require of cyber leaders? So first off, what do we mean by the workforce of the future? And let's go ahead to the next slide. what's happening in this moment is really a convergence of a number of disruptions and trends. If you think about the Industrial Revolution, and maybe we're in the fourth Industrial Revolution, as a lot of people say. Can you go to the next slide, please? What is happening is a convergence of technology and people-related challenges and disruptions, and the pace and the speed of these changes are happening faster than ever before. So we think about from a people perspective. Every year, Deloitte conducts a body of research that we publish in our human capital trends. And one of the outcomes of this year talked about alternative workers. So thinking about workers who are, maybe we talk about them as alternative, maybe they're alternative talent models, off books, just basically workers who are not our employees. So think freelancers, gig workers, et cetera. About 90% of our organizational leaders said that they actually have off-books workers in their organization already, but 25% of that population said they have no process in place for sourcing and managing that population. Can we bring up can you get the next slide up? We're still seeing the slide with the question. And I want to make sure we get to the trend slide while I talk through some of these. Well, I will keep talking about trends and we will get there eventually. One of the other trends that we saw when we did this research was that about 81% of organizations expect that artificial intelligence will have increasing and very important significance in the next 3 years, yet only a quarter of them think that they're ready to address that impact. So, just those few trends. You can see other trends on this slide. I think if you're at this conference, it's not news to you that there is a lack of cybersecurity talent for all the positions that are open in the United States. So cyber leaders are having to find new and unique ways to recruit into their organization. We're seeing increases in the expectations of that workforce in order to attract and retain them. There's more than ever a focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion. So finding different types of individuals to bring into your workforce and managing policy and process to be able to do that. And really, the future of work has sort of 3 converging angles. One is changes to work. So what is, who is doing the work and how is it getting accomplished? What can be automated? What can be accomplished by software versus a person? 2, changes to the workforce itself. So more and more use of those alternative talent models. In cyber, we see this more and more use of managed services. And when cyber leaders think about their workforce, a trend that we are seeing is more and more thinking about your total workforce, so your employees plus any other individual who's in your organization. So that would extend to contractors and vendors and other solutions providers. And then finally, the workplace itself, and we do not have to go farther back than 8 months ago to ask ourselves, like, if I were to ask you, what does the workplace of the future look like? Maybe in January, you would have started describing some physical space that looks like Google, I don't know, beanbag chairs and places to collaborate and trendy like stuff in a physical location. Now, I think if I ask you, what does the future of work look like? I bet many people in the participant list or in the audience is going to say, well, the future of work is virtual. It's a very different reactions to the same question, even over a short amount of time. So, how you respond in the moment and how our cyber leaders respond in the moment makes a huge difference for now, and also how organizations and leaders plan for the future. So let's go to the next slide. The cyber leader of the future, I think we are answering our own question with the title of this presentation, but we're posing that those are resilient leaders. Those are the cyber leaders of the future, and they are currently shaping the workforce of the future right now. How we're reacting to COVID-19, how we're reacting to a new telework environment, how cyber executives support that in the role that they play as a co-creator or even the instigator of innovation within an organization makes a big difference on what how the organization operates in the future and what their workforce looks like. So we have a brief video to share that is on kinetic leadership. which is a leadership term that we sort of uncovered through our global technology leadership study this year, was formerly known as the Global CIO Survey. And what we do every year when we do this research and publish this study is look at patterns of technology leaders. And what we see is there's really sort of three big archetypes: those who are instigators of change, those who are co-creators with the business, and then those who are trusted operators. So when you think of your, chief executive in cybersecurity, so your CISO, or you think of some of your other managers or executives in a cyber organization, or anybody really who's in a managerial or supervisory role as a leader, who are they and who they aspire to be? An instigator of change, a co-creator, a trusted business advisor. Another option is kinetic leadership. So let's go ahead and roll the video.
Organizations are on the lookout for kinetic leaders. These tech-savvy change instigators are a breed apart, stepping up to lead businesses to be more resilient and agile. Kinetic leaders put strategy into action, move ahead of disruption, and guide successful transformations, from vision through execution. Kinetic leaders are likely to be found in high-performing companies, and according to Deloitte's survey of 1,300 executives around the world, these companies stand apart from baseline organizations in several ways. They emphasize growth over costs. They are laser-focused on the customer, as well as innovation. And they prioritize new business models over business as usual. So how can technology leaders rise to the call to be kinetic leaders and lift their organizations with them? By embracing enterprise agility, encouraging the strategic and aggressive pursuit of technology-enabled opportunities, fostering a tech mindset within the C-suite and boards, developing new talent and ecosystems partnerships, and instilling new approaches and tools for the workplace, learning, and productivity. If that sounds like a lot, it is. But kinetic leaders are up to the job, and they are already taking the next step to reinvent the enterprise. Learn more about kinetic leaders and high-performing companies in Deloitte's 2020 Global Technology Leadership Study.
All right, so thank you so much, Sarah, and I hope that everybody enjoyed our 90 seconds of explaining what a kinetic leader is. And before we go on to sort of segue into resilient leadership and some of the qualities, we wanted to hear from each of you. So take a few seconds to put into the question and answer box one word that you think describes a resilient leader, pulling from what you saw in the video or pulling from your own experience. Okay, I got two of the same hits. Adaptable, absolutely, right at the same time. That was perfect. Anything else? Fearless, I see coming in, absolutely. So as you look at resiliency and you think about who a resilient leader might be, fearless, adaptable. What else is going to come in? Agile, absolutely. Optimistic, fantastic. Empathetic, yes, empathy, absolutely. And being open to change, perfect. All right. And lean, absolutely. In a cyber environment, absolutely. Lean is critical. All right, so moving on to the next slide, if you don't mind. So to set the stage for the remainder of our presentation, we wanted to break down some of the qualities of resiliency into actual leadership style. So we're going to talk a little bit about these 5 qualities, which will then help the rest of our conversation. So looking at resiliency and looking at leadership characteristics within a cyber organization, designing from the heart. How do you demonstrate to your employees and your customers that you have their best interest in mind? How do you reinforce cyber solutions that serve the mission of your organization directly? Owning the narrative. how are you actually focusing on information vacuums to combat misinformation? How do you look ahead and paint a picture and tell that story to your employees and to your organizations about the path forward for cyber? Aiming for speed over elegance. Part of the elements that are critical for a cyber organization in particular is efficiency, being lean, being able to solve problems in real time, and then putting the mission first. How do you turn the COVID crisis, for example, into an opportunity to emerge stronger in the future? How do you stabilize today and then harness those lessons for the future? And then embracing the long view. How do you stay focused on the horizon? How do you take the work that you're doing today and put it into motion for establishing a path forward? So thinking about these qualities and thinking about sort of how to transform that into a leadership approach and a leadership style that takes you into the ability to shape a future workforce for your cyber org, that's where we want to spend a little bit of time coming next. Next slide.
Cyber leaders can embody all of those qualities that you all pulled up. I love those, you know, the fearless, adaptable, agile, empathetic, lean. They can embody those qualities in action across 3 distinct phases. And I do think that, you know, thinking about the pandemic is a helpful use case in this instance, as we talk through like what this looks like in action and how it plays out over time. We'll use respond, recover, and thrive as the sort of 3 stages of these kinds of responses for resilient leaders. And really it's about how do you become a catalyst to change, you know, to challenge assumptions while also, you know, achieving your objectives, supporting the mission, and keeping everything going in the midst of a crisis to a point where you get to recover and then thrive and use this as a catalyst for change. So let's go to the next slide, which shows really a path of a resilient leader in action. And you can see that we have some, you know, if you look at the path, you've got respond, recover, and then thrive as you follow that path. And we've mapped some of these attributes of resilient leaders across each point in this path. So let me describe, I guess, from our observations, what some of this leadership looks like. So first, when you're in response mode, this is right, the crisis has happened. You are designing from the heart. You know, shifting your mindset from crisis to proactive planning for the future. You're then going into identifying and navigating these uncertainties by putting the mission first. You know, acknowledging that uncertainty is a part of your work, and particularly in cybersecurity, it's always our ability to be agile and adaptable is always required as a part of that workforce. So putting the mission first and acknowledging that uncertainty and then navigating through that to what is needed for the future. Then moving on as we get more into a recover stage. So you're not in the moment, but you're now looking back and taking, you know, what happened as lessons learned and ways, you know, ways to recover and what can you do next. Thinking about embedding trust as the way to recover. So again, sort of pulling on those leadership attributes of building trust, and doing that is essential to something when you do something new, right? Engaging your staff while giving them a strong mission-based message to rally behind. And then continuing that, you know, defining the destination and launching a recovery strategy. We saw a lot of leaders aim for speed over elegance. And, you know, that's okay. I think we're gonna get to this in a little bit later, but resilient leaders understand that mistakes are an inevitable part of experience. So as a resilient leader, one of the attributes you tend to display is creating a culture where fear doesn't prevail, right? You accept accountability for missteps, or, you know, use things that didn't work out as a teaching moment and lessons learned. And then you empower your staff with the tools and the skills and the capabilities they need to move on to the next thing, and to, you know, continue forward to meet the mission. And then this last piece, embracing a long view and learning from other successes, is a part of this as well. What are others doing, studying that and using that to shift toward future goals can be something that you do in the moment that helps you actually take what has been a challenge or a crisis, or we could even, liken this back to some sort of cybersecurity incident, and using that as a catalyst for change such that we as an organization thrive in the future. And it's really beyond recovery and recouping, and becomes, we become an even more capable and competent organization. So let's go to the next slide. Having this really brief primer on some of the attributes of cyber leaders, please put in the Q&A for us one thing that you would either recommend or that you personally would maybe adapt in your leadership style to be more resilient. We did promise interaction, so. Oh, I love that, owning the narrative. So we have one that says, I'm going to try to own the narrative more. Sometimes vulnerabilities just get the best of us and we end up scrambling to address stakeholder concerns. So taking more control of that narrative. Yep, exactly. One from another comment says, finding ways to have iterative feedback mechanism, which is a great way to establish a culture of trust and sort of recovery from missteps and mistakes, right? Knowing what we did and how we can change in the future leads to a positive dialogue that builds that trust as you go through some sort of, crisis or respond and recover to something. So those are great, really great examples. All right. Well, let's keep forging ahead because we have more leadership and action examples. And Pilar, I think I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Yes. Okay. Next slide. So where we want to take a look next is how to take these 5 qualities and some of the discussion around resiliency to challenge the status quo, because I think that what we've heard from cyber organizations is that you're so focused on the mission that sometimes it's hard to sort of pick your head up and sort of think about ways to do paradigm shift or to move the needle just a little bit, to do things differently. And looking ahead in the future, the goalpost is always moving, particularly when it comes to cyber threats and cyber risks. It's very important to just continue to sort of always think about a way that you can change it up. So if you could go to the next slide. So what we really want to do is focus on sort of the notion of experimentation. So we know that you're not going to want to change everything overnight. We know that that is not something that's even appropriate to propose, that there be a massive paradigm shift and everything just turns around overnight. So we wanted to talk about resilient leadership and experimentation with talent models and workforce strategies that really sort of shows that how you can sort of take one bite of the apple at a time. So a few things, the idea of piloting or incubating ideas that then you can scale is absolutely critical in this space. And when you look at talent models and look at the future of work and some of the journey that Sarah took you on a few slides ago, one of the things that we wanted to propose is that you embrace the long view. So for example, we know that reskilling cyber workforce is an option that all organizations have, but sort of questions around how do you do that? How do you experiment with that? Well, if you're a cyber leader, reaching over to the business side of your organization and asking if anybody wants to, if the business leaders have individuals who are interested in upskilling or reskilling. Before coming to Deloitte, I actually worked for the government, and I know that collateral duty and opportunities to continuously develop were very important to my colleagues. And so the idea of being able to learn new skills is absolutely something that many people would be interested in. Embracing the long view, looking for unconventional talent pools to help you thrive. For example, establishing a new pipeline of talent before the pipeline. If you're a business and you're looking for ways to hire and beat the curve, you absolutely can be looking at non-traditional talent pools, high schools, community colleges, vocational schools, apprenticeship programs, or just simply folks who are interested in changing careers, because those are the talent pools that haven't happened yet, and they are critical to building a new cyber workforce. I love to tell the story that my brother is a senior software engineer over at Amazon, but he was a philosophy major. That was not an atypical talent model, because you're reaching over into someone who comes from a liberal arts background and putting them in a very technical space and allowing them to develop. And then if you're an organization where you're really just looking to experiment with gigs, use this time now that we're in COVID to take advantage of people with skills who might, have bandwidth and cycles to provide a service to your organization. Try it once, and if it works, scale it. So those are just some examples of breaking the status quo, experimentation, piloting, without committing until you see what works and what doesn't for your organization. So if you could move to the next slide. So now think about resiliency, but then think specifically about breaking the status quo and ideas for trying it out, ideas for experimenting. And please put those into the chat so we can all hear.
And Pilar, maybe while people are responding or thinking of an idea for, challenging the status quo, one that I would offer up is the sort of interesting activity that we saw in Alabama with the Alabama School of Technology and Engineering. I don't know if you want to provide that example, but I'm happy to chime in with it. Basically it was a partnership with high school programs to provide training designed so that students would leave high school with the equivalent education of an associate degree and some certifications such that they were ready to be in the workforce before sort of, going to university, or I think maybe even deciding that they would want to go directly into the workforce and not go, not pursue further education at that particular moment in their careers. So an interesting way to sort of tap into talent and to reach beyond as an organization to other talent pools that allow you in the future to have additional members of your workforce that are, have the right skills and maybe not your traditional credentials.
Absolutely. No, thanks, Sarah. Absolutely. And that aligns nicely with the executive order that spoke about a workforce without specific credentials, but having those skills. Other ideas that are coming in are to think about ways to be proactive instead of reactive for recruiting. So rather than just posting something and waiting for responses, to proactively go and hunt the talent that you want in your organization, to go on to some of the LinkedIn environments, to go on to job huntings and to work with headhunters, to go out and find those employees before they find you. To also develop user stories and focus on the end user and the customer. That suggestion also came in. That is absolutely critical and a way to sort of shift the narrative. Doing research on local vocational schools, great answer, absolutely. What else is coming in? And then just finding talent in unexpected places and being open-minded when you actually look at candidate readiness and credentials. Is this candidate someone who will be able to step into a role and learn it quickly and deliver the work well? Or is it someone with 20 years of doing exactly what you're looking for? Both models could probably work. Can you experiment with the former? All right. So if you don't mind going to the next one, next slide. All right.
So we are now going to shift to some specific examples of resilient leaders in times of rapid change. We are framing this in the context of COVID-19 and trying to, again, we're threading the needle of resilient leadership, cyber leadership for sort of workforce issues, right? Because again, we're trying to say, what does it mean to be a resilient cyber leader and to lead, to plan for your workforce of the future immediately, and then using, that resiliency to use that to plan for the future. So go to the next slide and talk about some of the ways that resilient leaders are able to pivot in times of change that are posed by COVID-19, right? How did they flex their muscles to adapt to the circumstance and still be productive? So this first one, show up for your people, set the tone at the top. This may be self-evident, but how leaders behave during critical moments leaves a lasting mark on your culture as an organization, right? Panic and overreaction is not helpful, but complacency and giving the impression that leaders are downplaying a situation also doesn't really work. So being proactive and consistent in your messaging, I would say radical transparency to the extent that it's possible, and modeling behavior as the situation evolves becomes really important. So cyber leaders can show up for their workforce and mobilize their workforce by just setting the example of what it looks like in the moment to react in a calm and collected way. It's also very helpful in this sort of scenario to create regular opportunities to connect with your workforce. And I want to hit on one of the points that was actually brought up in the Q&A response, where I think it was suggested that leaders should stay connected with end users and other populations, and I would say business customers. That can also really set the tone. And as a cyber leader who wants to be a catalyst for future innovation, or a trusted business advisor, or a co-creator of things in the future, how you react in that moment can really catapult your, really give you a very strong ability and relationships that allow you to play that role in the future. So that becomes really important. And the next one, developing a plan for your workforce, designing from the heart, and developing a plan for your whole cyber workforce. That's another action that we saw, and I sort of alluded to it earlier, but it's really thinking about your workforce, not just your employees. So including your contractors, your vendors, anybody else who may be touching your organization at that moment can be really helpful as you evaluate critical contributors to your mission success. What solutions need to be provided from a cyber perspective for people beyond your employees can really change the way you execute on your mission, right? Many government agencies during COVID-19 had to find had collaborative platforms that required collaboration outside of the typical business, outside of your employees and into other organizations, workforces, and contractors and vendors, et cetera. And then last, owning that narrative. I think somebody else had alluded to this earlier, again in the comments, but really having a strategy for communication and then making it very visible can be very effective. And we have seen that culturally, and I think when you look, how would you measure that, right? So, okay, I think employee survey and employee satisfaction surveys, and other ways of collecting information about how your workforce is feeling in the moment, the sense of certainty or uncertainty that they have in their jobs and in the future of your organization reflects the culture that you're creating. And what we've seen is that leaders who make their thinking and their process and everything that they know highly visible have been the most successful at continuing to deliver on the mission and having a workforce that was highly productive and not as anxious about the future. So owning the narrative can be really important. And that goes hand in hand with, I think most cyber leaders know, but concealing risks never helps, right? So that transparency becomes really critical. So let's go to the next slide. A couple of examples that also tie back to the workforce from other organizations. These are also publicly available stories if you want more detail. The first one, related to the idea of designing from the heart and taking care of your employee population. This example is, an airline wanted to support their talent while also driving their long-term brand loyalty. And so designing from the heart led them to actually create an online portal that helped employees find jobs with other organizations. So they used their ecosystem of other businesses that they regularly work with, and to support their employees, they created an internal job site that advertised roles at a number of other large employers. who were looking to increase their workforce as the airline was decreasing theirs. And so a great example of designing from the heart in a time of crisis.
And so, aiming for speed over elegance, we touched on this as a critical quality, particularly for cyber leadership. And so a large educational institution in Asia Pacific area, it was a university, when COVID hit, they provided remote desktop access to all of their students. And shortly thereafter, basically right after rollout, the platform was compromised for a few days. So they took immediate action. They put in place the remediation measures that were needed, but then after they fixed the initial issue, then they took a long-term view, and instead of just sort of waiting for the next event to happen, these particular leaders decided to, invest in basically the digital identity, cloud and remote access solutions, and really make sure that their solution was longer term and not just highly reactive. It became proactive.
For this Department of Veterans Affairs example, this one, again, I think great success story for the VA. They went from 56,000 employees able to remotely access the VPN to 140,000 employees daily. Why is that important? Well, when you think about one, I think being a change instigator and providing the cybersecurity platform required for that collaboration. This was an organization where putting the mission first meant having the entire workforce on, able to collaborate and to have a stable digital environment that enabled them to collaborate and then, drive further innovation down the road. So a great example of the sort of intersection between cyber leadership and vision and workforce management.
And sort of last and definitely not least, so hindsight is 2020 for many of us sort of working from home during COVID. But in the case of the National Science Foundation, hindsight is foresight, or looking ahead, is actually 2020, because they were able to migrate to telework platforms years ago. And when the pandemic hit, they were fully prepared for a remote workforce. So sort of embracing that long view and being able to set efforts in motion to be successful as a leadership and as an organization, NSF is, the gold standard. All right, next slide.
So the question then becomes, okay, this is all well and good, Sarah and Pilar, but how does resilient leadership and being a resilient cyber leader tie back to the NICE workforce framework? And so let's go to the next slide, talk about this tool as in the way it supports industry and government. As a standard for industry and government for cybersecurity personnel, the NICE workforce framework allows you to, as an organization, do a number of functions related to your employees that really enhance the way that you manage your workforce, right? So having your positions and your workforce aligned to the framework allows you to have consistent processes and discussions for now and in the future about how you recruit and retain your employees. What are those career pathways and how do you have a mobile workforce? What internships and fellowships do you want to provide in the future to keep the interest and to build or reskill as needed? Does that change in the midst of, if and when that changes in the midst of some disruption, you can use the framework and you can use the descriptors that are in there because it's an industry standard to more quickly accelerate some of this planning, some of the planning and analysis that's required to manage your overall workforce. So Pilar, do you want to give us a little bit more on the specifics as we near the end of our presentation?
Yes, if you could go to the next slide. So we did want to acknowledge that multiple codes within the NICE workforce framework tie directly to the concepts behind resilient leadership. And we wanted to sort of outline the 5 that struck us. They are here for reference when we circulate these materials, but I actually wanted to make sure that we get to the Q&A So if you don't mind moving on to the next slide, because we've got about 3 minutes left and I want to make sure that we have some interaction to wrap this up.
So the question that we'll ask at the closing is, what quality do you think is the most important to you as a resilient leader? So when you think about your involvement in cyber workforce, whatever that angle may be, which of these is the one that you use the most, or you think would be the most important to be resilient? And as we get those responses in, we'll sort of let you know which one of these is the, if you have to have one takeaway, what your colleagues believe should be the primary takeaway as an attribute of resilient leadership. So go ahead and pick one and pop it into the Q&A.
Uh-oh, the first 3 coming in are all 3 separate ones. So no consensus on the most important just yet, but keep the answers coming in, please.
I don't know, embracing the long view is tied for #1 with 2 entries at this moment.
Yep. I don't know, putting the mission first just tied that one.
Oh, and designing from the heart now is also.
Okay, 3-way tie.
Oh, and there's one for owning the narrative.
Owning the narrative is actually my favorite, so I hope we get a few more hands raised for that one.
They're all equally important. Thank you. Thank you for that input. I would tend to agree with that comment.
Great. More for owning the narrative. Absolutely. And I know that we're down to just about 2 minutes. So as folks, put in their vote for which of these 5 stands out the most to them, also, please do send over some questions and we'd be happy to engage in that conversation before we wrap up.
Okay. Well, as more votes come in, I am starting to lose track of who is the winner, but I think, Pilar, you might have tipped the scales.
I know.
On owning the narrative. If we could go, let's go to the last slide while some additional points come in. And again, if you have a question or you want to ask it, please go ahead and put that into the Q&A. There are some resources that you can access. I know that these slides will be made available afterwards. We wanted to make sure you had these because we've referenced them throughout the presentation. But I think last but not least, just again, a big thank you for participating in the conversation today. Lots of active. We really appreciate that. And I think if I had one key takeaway for everybody, I think it would be what we all maybe already know, is that we might see cybersecurity as a tech challenge, but there's a significant human aspect to it. And the more that we can do to build the cyber workforce of the future and even understand what resilient leadership looks like, the better prepared we will be as a nation for the demands on the cyber workforce over the coming years. So we hope you found some of these ideas valuable, that you can take them back and apply them to your organization or education or whatever that may be. And we're always happy to continue the conversation. So thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much. Ooh.
Thank you, everyone. This concludes this first panel. Thank you, Pilar. Thank you, Sarah, again, for a great presentation. A lot of great discussions. So it's going to be a 15-minute break. We're going to start at 4:30. Those inside this room will be asked to refresh. So you'll be kicked out by host, and then you can just go through the breakout session link. Those speaking in the next panel have their personalized link that you'll be able to enter shortly. So thank you again, Pilar. Thank you again, Sarah.
Thank you, Randy. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.